The 14th Amendment offers equal protection under the law and other rights. Let's take a closer look at the 14th Amendment and what it says. Professor Leroy Purnell teaches constitutional law at FAMU Law and will break down the high points of the 14th Amendment to us. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me here.
What does the 14th Amendment say?
Wow, that's a big question because there are a lot of things in the 14th Amendment that most people don't recognize. First of all, I think it's important to note that the protections that are in the United States Constitution set forth powers and limitations on our federal government. After the Civil War, Congress decided that they needed to try to make a connection between those rights that are in the Constitution, that are protected in the Constitution from federal action, and connect that to what the states are doing. After all, we just come out of a Civil War, and there were issues of insurrection for people associated with the Civil War. And so Congress passed a series of amendments in the wake of Civil War and slavery to address some of these issues. One of the things that I think is very important for people to understand, and you mentioned about equal protection, and of course due process is another part of what we know the 14th Amendment most for. But one of the things that people need to remember, the 14th Amendment is a limitation on the power and intrusion of the state. It's not a limitation on individuals. And so when we talk about equal protection of the law, we're saying states must provide equal protection of the law.
That's a great point, because the question is, of course, if we have equal protection under the law, why is there a civil rights movement or a need for it?
Well, yes, because the civil rights movement addressed, and very early on after the 14th Amendment, the court sort of articulated the limitations of the 14th Amendment. But very early on, it was clear that private action was not covered. So discrimination, Jim Crow, all kinds of racially motivated activities were not covered as to private citizens, only a limitation on the state. So that was an aspect of the 14th Amendment. It took a long time for the courts to resolve that, but finally Congress decided that there must be another way to affect the actions of individuals, private citizens, and they did that through the Civil Rights Acts, which were extensions basically of what's known as the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay. The power of Congress to affect the actions of individuals has to have some avenue for doing that. That's some source of constitutional power under the Constitution. And so there is a provision within the Constitution that essentially allows the federal government to pass laws as they affect interstate commerce. And using the power of that Commerce Clause, Congress has said, well, when you engage in racism, when you engage in discrimination, you are affecting interstate commerce. And therefore we have the power to regulate and control that. And so that became an avenue for passage of course, the major Civil Rights Act of 1964, as well as other acts.
That's fascinating. Also want to touch on the national conversation around the 14th Amendment and the word insurrection and the act of an insurrection. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, again, the 14th Amendment has a lot in it, okay? It has things, it states what citizenship is. It talks about privileges and immunities that people have that are protected in terms of federal rights that are protected. It talks about equal protection, which we've just talked about. It also talks about something about the state not denying individuals due process of law, which is a whole nother area. Separate from those sections, that's section 1. That's 1 out of 5. Right? Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. We move on down the 14th Amendment and we see a provision which says that individuals who had engaged in insurrection or rebellion could not hold office. Now, this is in the news recently, and there's some controversy because there are some things about that section that aren't clear. Section lists individual offices that a person could not hold if they had engaged in insurrection or rebellion. It doesn't mention the President of the United States at first, but there is a catch-all phrase in there that says any other office. And so that's where much of the debate is right now. Now, it doesn't also, it doesn't contain language which says one must have been convicted of insurrection or rebellion
It does
before.
not.
It doesn't say that. So the courts have to determine whether or not a prior conviction is necessary before states such as what Colorado's done can prohibit somebody from running for office or being on their ballot because of insurrection or rebellion. So the insurrection and rebellion language of the 14th Amendment has rarely ever been used.
Right.
And this is the first time they've turned to it, but it was intended to deal with individuals who, in fact, were attempting to overthrow the government.
This is every time I see you, Professor Purnell, you know, I know how much I don't know. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and just taking time to be with us today.
My pleasure.
Thank you. We now have a better understanding of the 14th Amendment, and for more information, please read up on the Constitution and its amendments.